Welcome to episode 1354 of The Sleeper and the Bust. I'm Justin Mason, joined as always on Sundays by Jason Collette. How you doing, my friend?
I am trying to stay warm just like you. You know, we
Yeah.
got on off camera and we are both like, hey, nice hat. And by the way, Kenny,
Mhm.
thanks for the gift this year. I've worn this thing a ton for the last week because it has
I
been
have
cold.
to.
But yeah, definitely excited to be able to record again this Sunday. Somebody hit me up in the Joe Sheehan Slack channel. It's like, hey, are you guys recording again soon? I'm like, yes. You know, Paul's been at the winter meetings and, you know, schedule wise, it's been tough, but there's a lot going on. We finally have stuff to talk about. And let's rock. And then people wanted to do positional previews. I'm like, yeah, that's Paul and Justin's thing. And then I join in when I can on those. So it is definitely time to start talking because we've got lots of stuff to talk about.
It's been a really, really fun hot stove early on this year, which is fantastic.
Yeah, one of the better ones in a while.
Yeah, especially for us fantasy analysts who are always like waiting for news to drop so we can try to figure out what our projections or our strategies are going to be for the upcoming season. It's great that MLB isn't dragging it out as they have in years past. But we are going to talk about a bunch of moves that have happened since Paul and I recorded on Friday, including a massive trade that literally happened like an hour after Paul and I finished recording on Friday, because that's always how it works. But more importantly, we have a fantastic guest today. Joining us is one of the kings of fantasy baseball, Larry Schechter. How you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to get to sit down and talk with you. And you've got a new book that we're going to talk about here in kind of the second half of the show that I'm in, which is really, really cool. History of fantasy, or history of fantasy sports. We're going to do a little deep dive so that way people go out and buy it for this holiday season. It's a fantastic book. Definitely do that. But before we jump into some of our MLB moves, Larry, can you remind everybody kind of what you've done in the fantasy industry over the course of your career and where people can reach you on social media?
Well, I've never been in the fantasy industry as a profession, so it's been a hobby. I won the CDM Diamond Challenge overall competition 2002 and 2005, and that helped me get into labor and the Tout Wars. And I've been playing in labor and Tout Wars ever, pretty much 20 years or so. Won those several times. I wrote a book in 2014 called Winning Fantasy Baseball, and I just released back in May my new book, The History of Fantasy Sports and the Stories of the People Who Made It Happen.
Yeah, and I mean, Winning Fantasy Baseball for me was one of my favorite books when it came out. It kind of changed the way I looked at how I was preparing for my drafts, for my leagues. Really kind of helped me revamp my strategies. So, I mean, definitely another book you should be going on again, and we're going to be talking about your new book here in a little bit. So let's deep dive into some fantasy or some MLB transactions first, though. Let's start with that big trade that I referenced literally an hour after Paul and I finished recording. Devin Williams gets traded to the New York Yankees. This was a move that there'd been some kind of rumors that the Brewers were going to be willing to trade Williams, but they had kind of said, I don't know if we're actually going to make a move on that. But they move him. We'll talk about the return here in a second. Larry, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Devin Williams this year now being in New York pitching for the Yankees as opposed to in Milwaukee pitching for the Brewers?
I don't know that it changes much. I think the numbers say, but I mean, yeah, I don't personally think it changes much for him. He's still going to have a lot of save up. He would have had a lot of save opportunities in Milwaukee. He'll have a lot with the Yankees.
Jason, where are you at on Devin Williams? I know he came off of the back surgery. He was fantastic when he did. Does this move change anything for you with Devin Williams, or is he just still a top 5 to 7 closer?
I would say with the uncertainty of the closers in the market, that's the fact that he absolutely has the job puts a little more value because there's so many. You just look at the current projected closers and some of these, you're like, really? This is what we've got to deal with? I am a bit concerned about going from a small media market to an overwhelming media market situation and how he's going to handle that, because that's something he's never really had to do on a full-time basis with Milwaukee. But I do love the deal for both clubs. It was a need for New York, trading from a position of strength, and Milwaukee needed another pitcher in the rotation. And you would assume that the issue with Cortez's arm the elbow that was kind of floating around in October was good enough that the Yankees, tendered him a deal and did that. And then getting Cam Smith, it just seems like a great fit for Milwaukee and what they're trying to do with that. And I thought Milwaukee had enough bullpen. Obviously Trevor McGill would be the next guy that steps up. Piamps, Uribe, and then I still can't quit Nick Mears. There's still enough raw stuff there that it creates an opportunity for him if he could stop allowing home runs and walks, which is a lot to ask for a high leverage guy. So it was, I like these need for need, both teams benefit types of deals. And if, again, Milwaukee, this was the last year of Williams' deal. They never were going to resign him. So this is what you do. You trade him in the offseason, because if they try to trade him during the season, they're going to get like half this return.
Well, and the fact that they took the opt out on his deal that they had set up so they could try to get a cheaper deal in arbitration was a really good sign that they were not going to be keeping him for a long time.
Didn't they get a draft pick out of this as well? Did they get a compensation pick out of this, or am I like mixing all the deals from this week?
I think you're mixing the Springs deal, which we'll talk here in a minute.
I didn't know if that was part. I knew that one had one, but for some reason I thought this one had one too. But again, I thought this was a great deal for both. I'm a little more concerned, like I said, about Williams and the higher pressure media market and how he deals with that. Because let's be real, he is prone to the occasional hanging changeup home run at just the worst possible time. And you always have to pitch in the shadow of Mariano Rivera's closer reputation in the Bronx too. And that's an impossible bar for anyone. I'm sorry. That's not happening again. So stop holding everybody up to that under that lens.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this changed a ton. Go ahead, Larry.
No, I was just going to say when Jason was talking about that, I think, there is a risk of him going to to the media market that could be a problem. But at the same time, I was thinking, closers, if a guy like Devin Williams is coming in to pitch the 8th inning, he's not pumped up. If he's coming in to pitch the 9th inning with a 5-run lead, he's not pumped up. When he's coming in for a save situation, he's pumped up. Closers are like that. So I'm thinking, well, maybe he'll be more pumped up pitching in Yankee Stadium than in Milwaukee. So maybe it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, it absolutely.
Meanwhile, Milwaukee's bullpen is just another one of those messes, like Jason was talking about. There's 5-7 reliable closers, and then there's crapshoots everywhere else.
Yeah, I think the big question is there a set guy going to happen in Milwaukee? If people remember, prior to Devin Williams getting healthy, they kind of played a little carousel game. It looked like Abner Uribe at first. Everybody thought it was going to be Joel Piamps. Then Trevor McGill kind of emerged after Uribe struggled. I would guess McGill would get the first shot, but this is another one of these situations where if I'm in a draft right now, I'm probably drafting the last of these guys, right? Especially if I'm in a draft Champions League where you're drafting 50 rounds. I'm probably just going to take the cheapest guy and hope I hit as maybe my 3rd or 4th closer off the board.
Well, you can look at there were 12 pitchers in Milwaukee that had at least one save last year. But if you look at those who had multiple, there were 5. Elvis Peguero, Joe Piamps, Abner Uribe, Williams, and McGill led the team with 21. So it's there are 5 different guys with multiple saves. And Uribe, Piamps, Williams, and McGill all had 3 or more. So like you said, a little bit of carousel kind of play. I don't know if we see somebody with 30 saves on the club, because again, it's just not the way the game's being played anymore. It's not, if it's tie game in the 8th inning, guess what? Somebody's coming in. It's not that I'm holding this guy back for the 9th. Maybe the nerds, we finally won in this argument, and we know that we can use these pitchers and tie games in the 8th inning type of situation. But it's tougher. We talked about this first pitch Arizona, just how the 30 save closer is becoming harder and harder and harder to find.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to listener Ian. who's in a Gladiator slow draft with me right now and was on the clock when this news came down, but didn't check the news before he made his pick. He had a shot at getting Trevor McGill because we were that deep in the draft. And so he sent me a little message. He's like, "Oh, I can't believe I did that." I was like, you know what? I knew I wasn't getting him because I was just too far away. Let's talk about the return. We got Nestor Cortez and Caleb Durbin being traded from the Yankees to Milwaukee. Jason, what are your thoughts on Nestor in Milwaukee, a new organization for him? And then the prospect Caleb Durbin, who there had been talk that he might actually be the opening day second baseman for the Yankees.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more concerned. I think Nestor has the biggest downgrade here because, pitching in Yankee Stadium with the dimensions as a lefty and being able to use Death Valley to his advantage, he's not going to have that Milwaukee. This is a tougher environment for him. And division-wise, it's going to be a tougher overall environment. So I am less interested in Cortez. With Durbin, what I love about the Durbin thing is, like, who says the AFL means nothing? I mean, this guy went to the AFL, put on a show, and maybe the team was just saying he was going to be the starting second baseman because they had this trade talk in the works, that type of situation. But he went there and absolutely put on a show in the AFL and got himself a job. And we know Milwaukee loves these types of players. So this is he has a better chance of doing something in Milwaukee than he would have had with the Yankees this year, because there would have been the pressure if he's slumping. Okay, we'll send him back to Scranton. We'll pull somebody else. I believe that he'll have a really solid chance on doing something with Milwaukee. So I love this the most. I love for Durbin. I think he gets the biggest bump of the three players involved in this deal.
Larry, what are your thoughts on these two guys going to Milwaukee?
I don't really have anything to add to what Jason just said. I'm not that familiar with Durbin either.
Yeah, Durbin is a really interesting prospect. He's one of the few players in Major League Baseball that makes me look tall. He's 5'6", doesn't have a ton of power. He's got some speed in his game, but what he does do is he makes a lot of contact and he walks. I believe he's a pretty good defensive player as well. So, like, he's a pretty interesting prospect, but he's a little guy, and I always have a hard time buying into the little guys early on in their career because, when you're going up, when you're in the same division as Paul Skeens, you're going up against 100 plus mile an hour fastball. As a guy who's 5'6", going to be able to kind of compete with that. We'll see. I think he may get a shot at some point, but the Brewers infield is, pretty well, covered, at least up in the middle when you've got, Bryce Terang and Joey Ortiz. I mean, I guess they could. I think it's really going to come down to how Durbin plays defensively, right? The Brewers have made a point of having a pretty good infield defense. And so I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't show well defensively at the major league level if he's going to stick around. As far as Nestor goes, yeah, I think this is kind of a downgrade, obviously, from him. A little bit worse offense to kind of support him. But he's just always a fun pitcher to watch, and he's going fairly cheaply in drafts right now. So he's a guy that I'm not afraid to take a shot on, especially if his price dips moving from New York to Milwaukee. All right. The next move was another huge move, I believe happened either Friday or Saturday. And that was Kyle Tucker, who had been rumored in trade talks. One of the places he'd been rumored to was the New York Yankees. But he ends up going to the Cubs in a pretty massive deal. He's another guy who is a pending free agent after this season. The Astros kind of came to the realization, I think, after the Soto deal that they probably weren't going to be able to sign Kyle Tucker to a long-term deal. So they went to see what they could get for him right here. Larry, what are your thoughts on Kyle Tucker heading to Chicago?
I was kind of surprised to hear the news, but I guess you're right. Yeah, after Soto, who's going to be able to sign anybody after Soto? I mean, it's like there's going to be like no one's going to sign anybody except maybe the Mets and Yankees will sign a couple of people, and the Dodgers will sign somebody, and then they'll be like 50 free agents still looking for jobs next May. I mean, it's crazy. It's like, where does this end? I mean, I didn't want to talk about Tucker. I just want to talk about where does this end? The guy's getting $750 million until he's age 40 or 41. I mean, how did Albert Pujols look the last few years when he was like 40 years old? I mean, how do they do that? How do they say, you know what, I'm going to give this guy 15-year contract for 55 million or whatever per year until he's 41? I mean, let's just like cancel Major League Baseball. Let's like disband the league and start all over again with a salary cap or something.
I think that's what the owners are going to be pushing for when we get to a CBA time. Yeah, I think the next labor contract is going to be pretty ugly, to be honest.
That, or they all think the world's going to end and they don't have to pay out the back end of the deal. I mean,
yeah,
one of the two.
That's actually what I told Paul. I was like, the Dodgers, especially with all their deferred money, are just hoping the world ends in 2030.
Yeah, or he's thinking that. Well, I mean, what was the deal like after 5 years? If they don't increase his annual salary by $5 million after that, he can opt out after 5 years. Is that what I remember seeing in the deal? Like, Soto's got a lot of control in this if he wants to, but I can't imagine the marketplace being any bigger because part of the rush and all this and why we see some of this is just how the regional sports network, the funding from that has reshaped everything. So I mean, go back 5 years ago, and this was all about. This money's going to continue to flow in and everybody's going to do this. And then the bottom fell out of that. And so now it's like, now what? And that's why, the next wave is I want the real estate around the stadium so I can build it up like what Atlanta did and what they're trying to do around Citi Field and what the Rays, if they ever find a new home, what they're projected to do in St. Pete, they all want to build around the stadium and control that type of thing because that regional sports network money is poof, it's gone. It is, the league wants to centralize it all. And hey, if they centralize it all and we get rid of blackouts, then it was totally worth it.
Absolutely. I cannot stand blackouts. And I know there are people in different areas of the country where like they're blacked out from 4 or 5 teams.
6?
Yeah.
I think the folks in Iowa have like 6 teams that they can't see.
I know when I went to Hawaii a few years back, I couldn't watch any West Coast games.
Well, I mean, that's your fault. Swimming over there, kayaking.
Yeah. Hawaii was blacked out from all the West Coast games. So.
That's unreal.
So, Larry, I mean, does this change much for you in terms of Kyle Tucker going to Chicago?
Not much, and Tucker's the kind of player who, when I'm in an AL option like labor and tout wars, I've been in the American League, and Tucker's the kind of guy. Somebody's going to pay like $5 more for him than I would have paid, so I'm never going to get him anyway. And if I was in a National League auction, same thing would happen, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's typically one of those studs that people are willing to kind of break the bank for, and you and I tend to spread out our money a little bit more and stick to our values quite a bit more than I think a lot of people. So we end up probably not getting them, especially in the auction format. Jason, where are you at on Kyle Tucker moving to Chicago? Does it change much for you?
It does to a point because one of the things one of the frustrations we've always had with Kyle Tucker was that they didn't hit him higher in the lineup. They would hit him 5th, they would hit him 6th, and we're like, oh my God, just put this guy higher in the lineup. And then last year they did. I was just looking over while you guys were talking, and last year around all the injuries, he hit 2nd and 3rd. But I remember in 23 and 22, and like finally the year that they finally listened to everybody crying about this, they move him up and he gets hurt. But in previous years, that was a problem. But in Chicago, I don't foresee this being a problem. He should be able to hit high in the lineup, should be able to steal his bases. The problem I have is the surrounding talent. There's some question marks there. With how that lineup, when he had the insulation of Altuve and Alvarez in Houston, that's nice insulation. With Happ and Suzuki, who may not even be there because he's been in his own trade rumors, what's going to happen with that lineup? So this may be one of those cases where Tucker volumes his way, and if he can stay up high in the lineup and stay healthy, this could be a really nice season for volume. But I don't know if he's going to have that monster, the tons of runs scored or the RBIs. Like trying to find, we were talking earlier how 30 saves guys are becoming tougher to find. Finding somebody that's going to have 100 plus runs and 100 plus RBIs in the same season is getting tougher and tougher to find as well. And Tucker has the skills to do that. but he's never done that in his career. He's driven in 100 runs twice. He's never scored more than 97 because he's been too far down the lineup. So maybe this is the year both those things happen, but he needs Ian Happ to get on base a ton for that to happen. So I would lean more to him scoring 100 runs for the first time in his career than driving in 100. But as long as, like I said, as long as he stays healthy, he should be able to volume his way to a nice season.
Yeah, I think it's all about health, right? I mean, you look at what he did in a half season last year with 23 home runs, 11 stolen bases, 56 runs scored, and 49 RBIs with 289 batting average. Like, those are amazing numbers for half of a season. The question is, coming off of that injury that kept him out for so long, is he going to be able to play in 155 games in order to kind of volume his way? He's currently going as kind of a mid to late first rounder. I expect that he's going to stay there, moving from Houston to Chicago. I still feel like I'm probably not going to get him very often. Maybe if he drops in a draft, I could see myself pulling the trigger, but I don't know. I don't think he's quite, especially coming off of virtually half season due to health. Like, I don't know that he's worth exactly where he's kind of going right now in the early drafts.
Do you see the play? Do you see like an NL only leagues? Do you see the play where people are going to go into it this year and be like, okay, I'm going to try to get Soto. And if the cost is just too crazy expensive, then I'm going to try to, how many plans are we going to see in mono leagues like that, where it's, I'm going to try plan A is Soto, plan B is Tucker, plan C is spread the risk. When you have two huge names making a jump over like this, makes for an interesting NL only.
Well, there's still a lot of big names other than them that's there. Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, et cetera. So there's a lot of top guys you can go after.
You think it pulls down their cost a little bit, like a Freeman and an Ohtani and a bet, like just say the Dodgers. Do you think the addition of a Tucker and Soto brings that cost down a little bit more, or is it everybody else going to stay the same, or we're going to be stealing that value from the replacement level?
Well, technically, it should bring everybody down just slightly. If you add a few really top players, and more than you lose, and it would have the opposite effect of the American League. But it's not going to. It's the difference, really, though. It's like very slight.
Gotcha.
And there's always going to be people willing to spend. It's very rare that you get into these kind of, especially like 12-team mono leagues, where there isn't at least one or two people that are willing to kind of just drive the price on the big guys. And I love those guys because they make the middle guys cheaper for me. So, all right. What about the return there, Jason? Going back is Hayden Wesneski, Isaac Paredes, and Cam Smith going back to Houston. I don't know where Wesneski figures into the pitching staff for the Astros. I don't know if they're going to try to give him an opportunity to start, or if they're just going to keep him as a bullpen guy. But Isaac Paredes, he played really, really well in Tampa, kind of struggled after being traded to Chicago. But this Houston park is kind of set up fairly perfectly for his type of swing. Where are you at on Paredes this year?
Yeah, I made a joke. They should call it Paredes on the fence out there in left field, because that's where he hits everything. I mean, we've often joked on this podcast about just how everything, if Paredes hits a fly ball, it is going to left field. And the move from Tampa Bay to Chicago, you could see it coming. It was going to be a struggle, and that's absolutely what it was for Paredes. But if there was a park that he could have picked, this would have been it for his approach. I mean, it is what it is. He's got the oddest baseball savant player profile there is. You see so much red in the contact and so much blue everywhere else. He's such an extreme hitter because he's truly up there waiting for a pitch he can pull and elevate. And if he thinks he's identified it and it ends up not being that, it is. But he'll accept his walks. He makes a lot of contact, which puts him at risk for a double play. But it's this. I don't know what Houston's going to do, because offensively, I mean, they took a talent in Tucker that was dynamic on the base pass when he was fully healthy. And this looks very much like a station-to-station softball team at the moment, outside of Altuve, who's not running as much as he used to, but this is a very station-to-station club. And I don't know if they're just going to rebuild this offense to be like, we're just going to try to hit home runs now. I don't know if they're done here. I think everybody has tried to put Christian Walker on just about every team in the offseason. And this would be a great fit. Like if they're going to lean into this softball-like approach, then put Walker on this lineup, and they look a lot better. But this lineup is very front-loaded, and the back of it looks very blah at the moment. But this looks like a very stationary team. And I only bring that up because I'm concerned about the impact on Yordan Alvarez, who's been just such a monster. And now he's going to have people that are not moving on the bases. He could maybe Altuve doesn't get on, and then Paredes is hitting in front of him. Paredes gets on first. Paredes is not stealing any bases, so he's not going anywhere. So it's like Yordan's going to have to potentially even triple to score him in that case. So I'm more concerned about the trickle down effect on this overall lineup, and in particular Yordan Alvarez, if they don't do anything else this offseason. It's just kind of the child Astros fan in me is just like, you're in the fourth largest market in the country. Stop playing, stop behaving like a small market team. They don't re-sign any of their guys. They let Bregman, you let Bregman go, you let Tucker go. And so far you bring one guy in, Paredes, and you really don't have anything coming up from the minor leagues that's going to be like, let's do it. So overall, I don't like. I'm more concerned as a Yordan Alvarez. In one league, I had Alvarez and Tucker. I could only keep one of them. The decision was made for me because this was an AL only league. But I'm like I said, I'm really concerned about how this impacts Yordan Alvarez's overall production.
What about you, Larry? What are your thoughts on the return going back to Houston?
Well, Jason is so thorough and intelligent. I have nothing useful to add to it. I could just make up something so I feel like I'm contributing, but I've got nothing intelligent to say to add.
If all of this translated into my fantasy results, analyst results.
I mean, I'm really interested to see what Houston does with the rest of this offseason because, Houston has been kind of a powerhouse team over the last, 7 years or so in that, AL West. And currently their outfield as projected is Chase McCormick, Taylor Trammell, and Jake Myers. That is not the team we thought that we were going to be seeing being run out there in Houston on opening day. So I assume they're going to make other moves because I can't imagine they enter the year with this team as currently constructed. I understand that they're, looking to, kind of cut some payroll and stuff, but that's a pretty competitive division. We expect the Rangers are going to bounce back after a disappointing 2024. The A's are actually trying to get better. The Angels are still the Angels, but Seattle's still a really good team in that division. If they want to compete for, a playoff spot in the AOS, like I don't think this does it with Houston. The top half of that lineup looks good. Bottom half of that lineup looks atrocious.
Maybe they can bring Teoscar Hernandez back home because remember he was an Astros prospect way back when. Anthony Santander. Yeah, I think he's looking for a 5-year deal that may take him off the plate. Plus, they don't. He would ideally be a DH, and they want to take Yordan out of the field more as well. So, like Teoscar would seem to be a great fit. If they want to go 3-4 years and spend the money on there, maybe, I'm looking at the free agent list, maybe Profar. But if this
Profar would make some sense. Yeah.
If this is like the Hoosiers moment, that's your team on the field. Yeah. Not very excited about this, the Astros club for 25.
Yeah. I mean, right now you're looking at, with kind of the available outfielders right now. It's Profar, Teoscar, and Santander, who are kind of the main names. But then you've got Jock Peterson. You got a lot of guys who probably can't really play well defensively in that outfield. Could they bring in a guy like, I don't know, Mark Canha, Max Kepler? Might make some sense in Houston, but they got to do something. They can't be rolling with this outfield as currently constructed now that Tucker's gone. Carson Kelly, kind of a quiet name that signed a deal after these two big trades went. He signed a 2-year deal with the Cubs. I think my big question on that is, one, Larry, are you interested in Carson Kelly at all from a fantasy perspective? And two, does this hurt Miguel Amaya's chances of racking up plate appearances in Chicago?
Yes, it hurts his chances about Amaya. And I mean, if I was in an NL only league needing 2 catchers, I mean, I'd have to look at Kelly as an option for one of my 2 catchers, but it's nothing very exciting unless we get closer to opening day and they're saying Kelly's going to be the number 1 guy and play 450 at bats, which right now is very questionable. If he's getting 300 at bats, that's not very exciting. Just like the second catcher in an NL only league.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think Carson Kelly's days of massive relevance are probably behind us. He showed some flashes in Arizona, but just never really was able to keep anything together for a long period of time. Jason, any interest in Carson Kelly?
Yeah, and it's kind of one of these hidden things about it. So last year, the Cubs were 12th overall in catcher caught stealing above average as a club, but Carson Kelly is a top 10 guy. I'm looking at the leaderboard right now, and his caught stealing above average was tied with Cal Raleigh, Gabriel Moreno, who we sang a lot of praises about this past year. Kelly's one of the better stolen base deterrents in the league that was open on the market. In fact, he was the best guy I felt on the open market. And I really wanted him. The Rays ended up with Danny Jansen, who's not good at that because they did a 1 year with a mutual option. I guess they weren't willing to go 2 years with Carson Kelly, but I thought he would be a good fit. So I look at this as Carson Kelly may get a little more playing time because of his ability to control the running game. And maybe there's a slight bump for those Chicago starting pitchers with Kelly back there as a deterrent for that. So that's my overall. But the player in and of itself, not terribly excited about, but his value, his real baseball value to the club, I think is a hidden benefit here.
Let's talk about the last trade on our rundown for today. And that is Jeffrey Springs and Jacob Lopez traded to the A's. We'll get to the return here in a second. But Larry, what are your thoughts on Jeffrey Springs heading to Sacramento, not Oakland, to go pitch for the A's?
He should be better his first full year after surgery, like most people. And wins are going to be harder to come by in Sacramento. But he's certainly, I think he should be very good again, I would think, other than wins being harder to come by.
Wins will be tough to come by anyhow.
Yeah, wins are definitely going to be tough to come by. It's interesting to see Oakland making some of these moves. I know there was talk that the players union might actually file a grievance against the A's for not spending money, but taking all the shared pool money and just pocketing it. So that's potentially why they're kind of making some of these moves with with Luis Severino and now Jeffrey Springs brought in. Jason, you're a Rays guy. You've been watching Springs for a while now. What are your thoughts on him moving out of Tampa and going to Sacramento?
I thought like a year late. Like he would have been perfect for Oakland Coliseum. Him and Lopez, both with the soft contact, with the way they pitch. It would have been ideal for them there with all that, with the way they induced the soft fly ball contact. Not so much in Sacramento. And even I was a little excited, and Justin, I know you were because you drafted a ton of Jeffrey Springs so far, about him pitching in the Yankee Stadium dimensions, given what we said about Cortez earlier and being able to leverage Death Valley and whatnot. So that was, I think it's a slight decline for Springs, but I never thought he was going to stay with the team. They have a lot of pitching. Everybody's finally healthy, and somebody had to go. And it made sense that this was the person going. They protected Joe Rock from the Rule 5 draft. He's in AAA Durham. They like what they see there, and he could be their next version of Springs and see what a project that they grabbed from somebody else. Because remember, Springs was somebody they got out of the Red Sox organization. I believe it was a DFA, and they ended up just getting Springs and turning him what they turned him into with that. So that's where I see. I mean, I'm most excited just to transition over, I really want to see what Kyle Snyder can do with Joe Boyle. I mean, yeah, I've watched some highlights. The slider, you go look at his Fangraphs page. The Stuff Plus on his slider, it's elite. Like you get all the way out there, you see elite. And I was texting with my son yesterday because he was like, "Oh, they made the trade. Who's this Joe Boyle guy?" And I was like, "Look at this stuff graph." He's like, "Wow!" And then I showed him his walk rates. I'm like, "Yeah, look at those." He's like, "Oh!" So it could go either way. But Kyle Snyder tends to get the most out of guys with this kind of stuff. So I guess the fandom is really excited to see what they can do with Boyle. Everything else would be gravy. I mean, I don't know what they do with any of the other pieces, but it's clear they identified like Boyle is the guy. I mean, Lopez was just a guy in the organization. There's honestly he could go into that A's bullpen and be a swingman. That's what he is. He's from California, so good for him. He gets to go back home. And so, I'm sure he's excited about that, but he was just a guy in the organization that the club is up, down a whole bunch. And, here, that's what we have.
Yeah, I mean, Springs has been my most drafted guy in early drafts. So it was not a fun thing to wake up to go see. Oh, he's
your text reaction was not good.
Yeah, I was not happy to wake up yesterday and see that Springs was no longer going to be pitching in Tampa, but pitching in Sacramento for the A's. That being said, his ADP so far this draft season is at pick 235, and that's going to drop. I think people are going to be sufficiently scared in terms of Jeffrey Springs pitching in Sacramento in that minor league ballpark. And I think that kind of gives a buying opportunity, kind of a person you can, yes, there's definitely going to be some risk. Wins are going to be hard to come by, but he's a really, really good pitcher. He was fantastic last year once he came back from the Tommy John surgery. It was only 33 innings, but it was a 3.27 ERA. He had a 26% strikeout rate. And, that's with kind of some of the issues that come along with your first, part or the season back from Tommy John. I think Springs is going to be a guy I like to buy right here for, especially once that price drops more after this trade. So he's a guy I'm definitely interested in.
I just got to add, when I was talking about it before, I forgot about the park change. I was thinking about the Athletics, but yeah, the park is definitely a downgrade for him. So he's a good pitcher, but that's definitely downgrade with that park going from Tampa Bay.
Yeah, that's going to be the big question. And the hard part is right now, we don't really know how that park is going to play. I'm still waiting for some of the smarter guys in our industry to kind of do the analysis on the park and kind of give us an idea. Obviously it's not going to play exactly like a lot of PCL parks do play, because Sacramento is one of the more pitcher friendly parks in the PCL, right, but it's still the PCL. So, it's still a minor league park. Once we get some analysis on that, we'll kind of have a little bit better idea of how potentially a guy like Springs or a guy like Severino may fare in that park. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think the fantasy baseball community as a whole really overreacts to things. And so when they overreact to Springs being traded to Oakland, I think he was already going too cheap in drafts. I think we're going to see him go even cheaper, and I think he'll be a nice little buying opportunity for people.
And the other, I would say this for Tampa Bay or even former Tampa Bay pitchers now as a whole, there's been a lot of people discussing and writing things about how Tropicana Field has been like on the extreme for induced vertical break, about how it's been their pitchers have just done better at home and overall than anything else. And so now that they don't have that home, it's just not available to them, maybe forever. But they don't have that. So I'm very curious to see how the pitching staff adjust to pitching outdoors, to having to pitch on the road so much on the back half of the season. Because remember, a lot of their home games are front loaded, and they're going to be living that road warrior life a lot in the second half of the season. And we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last piece on the docket for moves is one that happened this morning. Brian De La Cruz signs a non-guaranteed deal, as Jason pointed out to me when I was adding it to the rundown, in Atlanta. Larry, any interest in a guy like Brian De La Cruz in Atlanta?
Off the top of my head, I am not familiar enough with him to say. So I'll let you two take this one.
Jason, thoughts on Brian De La Cruz?
The joke I made, it's Chris Rock. You're only as loyal as your options. So the fact that Atlanta gave him a non-guaranteed deal, it kind of screams how much they lean into this. It's like, here's an option coming into camp, and let's see what happens. The raw tools have always been there, but the flaws have always been there as well with De La Cruz. So Atlanta's got a track record. They've picked up these guys previously and done something and gotten the most out of guys that everybody else has been like, let's try something else. But the fact that Miami and Pittsburgh, two very budget-minded teams, have decided not to keep this gentleman around, and now he's going to Atlanta. So watch, he'll finally blow up. But it's definitely a bat-first profile. The defense is if they can tap into this power, and maybe this is what they've tried to do with Adam Duvall the past couple of years. Maybe this is what they're like, hey, this is that role. We want that power bat that we can tap into, and we'll live with everything else. And maybe that's what their approach is, and see what happens in spring.
It's an interesting move, because when you've got a guy like Marcell Ozuna that you're just sticking at DH, Ozuna's not hitting the field. Why bring in a guy like Brian De La Cruz who can struggle defensively?
Right.
And I don't know that this is a great fit, and I would not be surprised if he does not make the team and either get sent down or released, due to the non-guarantee in the deal. So I've never been a big Brian De La Cruz guy. I don't think he does have some power in the bat, but he consistently makes below 80% zone contact. He doesn't walk. He's not a very good defender. I just think there's too many red flags for me on a guy like De La Cruz to want on my fantasy teams regularly.
Yep, definitely an NL only, like a 12-team NL only option.
Yeah.
Or a draft and hold for those of you guys still in draft and hold.
Or maybe even a 20-team NL only.
Yeah.
League.
All right. That wraps. That wraps all our moves for today. So let's talk about the meat of the episode, and that's Larry's book. So Larry, talk to me, or first tell everybody what the book is, and give us the pitch on why we should be going out and getting this for Christmas.
Well, I've looked around at the industry for a long time, and I wonder how did this happen? We had ideas for games people had years and years ago, and it's become this humongous multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. Everything from fantasy football, fantasy baseball, to fantasy wakeboarding, cricket, fantasy Iditarod. There's millions and millions of people playing. Sirius XM radio 24/7 channel. You got podcasts, and what we're doing right now. News services, stat services. So I wonder, how did this all happen? Nobody has ever written a book or given any explanation of how this was all created. And you can get bits and pieces of it here and there, researching or looking at something, but no one's ever explained this. So I've thought for a long time, somebody needs to write a book about the history of fantasy sports. How did this all occur? So I decided to do it. I started a little over 2 years ago. I had no idea what I was getting into. It was a ridiculously huge project. It took me 18 months, full-time research, interviewing dozens and dozens of people. And my original idea was, find out who did what, when, how it all happened, write the history of fantasy sports. But when I started getting into it, I would hear all these fascinating stories of what people did. There were things that were inspirational, the things that would bring a tear to my eye, lots of funny anecdotes. And so I realized early on, I could just write the history of fantasy sports, who did what when. It'll get the job done. It'll also come off as a very boring research paper. But by incorporating the stories of what people did that were so interesting, I can tell who did what when and get the job done. But instead of being a boring research paper, it'll be fascinating, which is what's happened. The book turned out better than I could have imagined. People say it's fascinating, it's easy to read. The reviews are fantastic. People who've never played fantasy like the book, because it's not about strategy or how to play fantasy. It's about the stories of the entrepreneurs and what they did. So that's it in a nutshell.
It's my wife has gotten it. She's already read it. She will not let me use her copy to read, so I'm gonna have to go out and buy my own copy to read it. But this is right up my alley. For those who don't know, I have a degree in history, and obviously I love fantasy sports. So I'm super excited to sit down and break it open. What kind of research did you have to do? Because I mean, we have a lot of, you have a lot of people in the industry. But there's also, this is a game that's been going on for a really long time at this point. And some of the people, like, our good friend Laura Michaels has passed away. So how did you what went into the research for this book?
Well, it was a lot of Google searches, Googling one article after another after another. There's a website, I think it's called newspapers.com, where you can pay a subscription. You can look up articles from years ago. There's another website you can get websites from years ago. And I just researched everything. I talked to lots and lots of people. Some of them I know. A lot of people I had to track down. I talked to Dan Okrent. I talked to Clay Walker, who was the head of the NFLPA Players, the NFL Players Association for a number of years. I just tracked down a lot of people through Facebook, LinkedIn, connections. Somebody knows somebody else. There's a guy named Andy Musolimus, who is a guy who really spread fantasy football back in the 60s, and he passed away. I tracked down one of his grandkids on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
They thought I was some kind of weirdo at first until I could really explain what I was doing. And the thing is, I like Andy Musolimus, for example. I mean, I would like read article after article after article about what he did, and to the point where I'm reading the same stuff 20 times. But then every so often there'd be like one little tidbit of new information, and when I got a hold of his grandkid, I got some new information from his grandkid. One of like Musolimus, for example. The first fantasy football league was started in 1963 by a guy named Bill Winkenbach, and a couple of other guys were with him. Musolimus was one of the first members, but they kept it to themselves for the most part. But Musolimus owned a bar in Oakland, and he decided a couple of years later it'd be a good idea for his business to make fantasy football available to his patrons. So he told some of his regulars that started a league. They loved it. The second year there was another league, and then another league. Then there was a women's only league, because there were women that wanted to play, and the men back then did not want to play in a league with the women. And then people would come into the bar. They would see this, what is this game these people are playing? So they'd start a league, and before you know it, like bars from all over the country are calling Musolimus saying, "Hey, I heard about this fantasy football thing. How did you do that?" So he really helped fantasy football spread. And so one thing about him, I'm reading 20 articles, same, like I said, mostly same information. There's a little tidbit here and there. I get to like the 20th article, all of a sudden I read something I hadn't read before. Musolimus was a war hero. When he was 17 years old, Pearl Harbor happened. He enlisted. The recruiter said, 97% of you are not going to return. Wow. But he enlisted anyway. He went on a mission behind enemy lines, and he survived, obviously. So, it's like spreading fantasy football was like pretty insignificant compared to that.
That's a great story. And I love stories like that. I mean, this is, his name, his story probably wouldn't get told, in the way it was, or the way you're doing it without you writing this book. So it's a pretty amazing story. There's going to be a lot of amazing stories. Did you have a favorite chapter that you wrote? Maybe one with your favorite fantasy baseball podcaster that you're currently talking to.
Loaded question.
Yeah, well, for sure, writing about Justin Mason was the highlight of the book. I was going to call it The History of Justin Mason, but I thought you'd want royalty rights, so I didn't do it.
Yeah, no, I don't know if that one would sell books.
There was, now there's no favorite chapter, but there's just like so many good stories, if it like I mean, I could sit here and rattle off, stories. One of them, I'll start with an inspirational one, or one that, made, brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah, I was going to ask
The book
you had mentioned
starts with,
earlier. I was
yeah,
you
the book
mentioned earlier
starts with,
one of the stories brought tears to your eyes. So I would like that's what I was going to ask because I'd like to hear one of those.
yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a couple of them. I'll tell you one. The book starts with precursors to fantasy. There were tabletop games that go back to the 1800s, then there are games, board games, Catico Ellis All-Star Baseball. Then you get into like App and Stratomatic. These are precursors to modern fantasy. And they're when I started the book, I thought, I'll probably write 2 or 3 paragraphs mentioning App and Stratomatic were precursors. But when I started researching, it's like there's so much good information about App and Stratomatic. I've got a lot in there about it. There's like a Cal Ripken Jr. playing Stratomatic with John Miller, the Orioles announcer, on a flight from Baltimore to the West Coast. Very interesting story about them playing Stratomatic, and other stories about Stratomatic. Anyway, there's an Apple League where guys started it in college, and it kept them together through the years, whereas otherwise they probably would have drifted apart. There was a guy in this particular Apple League named Randy Walker. In 2018, he developed ALS. So they thought he's going to have to stop playing. His wife said, if you want to keep playing, I'll do whatever I have to do so you can keep playing. So she went to the games with him. She would roll the dice. He'd tell her what moves to make. And he did this, and it was about the 3rd year. He was to the point where he could only communicate through an eye reader and a computer, and his wife could read his lips. And in this condition, his team came from 2 runs behind in extra innings to win his first ever APA World Series championship after 39 years in the league. And everybody broke out crying.
That's awesome.
That's an amazing story.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love it.
And then on the other hand, you got, for example, this guy, Bill Pullman, who wrote one of the first fantasy publications. There's chapters in the book that the precursors and the invention and spread of fantasy football, the invention and spread of fantasy baseball, the first commercial games, the first publications, radio shows, through more, Fantasy Sports Trade Association, legal issues, more modern things like daily fantasy sports, the worldwide spread of fantasy sports. So there's a guy named Bill Pullman who had one of the first publications, and when his first year playing fantasy, got to the last week of the regular season, and there was one game left. I forget, it was either Sunday night game or Monday night game. He had one player going in the night game, and if this guy got a touchdown, he would make the playoffs. And if he didn't get a touchdown, he would not make the playoffs. And back then, there's no internet, so he had to go get a newspaper the next morning to get the box score for the night game. He buys a newspaper, he goes into his office building, he goes into the men's room, he sits down in a stall, he's flipping through the paper, gets to the box score, sees this guy got a touchdown. He says, yes, yes, yes. Gets out of the stall. There's 3 men staring at him. Also, one day, his wife said, "Honey, do you need a kicker for your fantasy team?" And he's like, "Yeah. How did you know?" And she says, "Last night in your sleep, you were mumbling, 'I need a kicker. I need a kicker. I need a kicker.'"
That's funny.
That one hits close to home because I can't tell you how many times Danielle has been like, "Hey, have you checked your lineups? Have you checked your teams? You seem to be muttering things in your sleep last night about whether or not you've got enough runs or something like that." And I was a little worried about you.
That's Larry, question I had is, one of the things that's always driven me nuts is, especially in fantasy, like baseball in particular, how can we get it back to where things were? Like when I was in college, we had Baseball Weekly that came out every Wednesday. And I remember stopping at the 7-Eleven. I can even tell you exactly where. University and Dean Road, on my way into UCF. I would stop at the 7-Eleven. get a baseball weekly and a Slurpee, and then I would go, or a big gulp, depending on what mood I was in that morning. And then I would go to class and I would have it. It's like now it's sports weekly and baseball's barely covered. And then my sorest of all things is Sirius XM forgets fantasy baseball exists once it becomes July 1st. And it pisses me off to no end. So it's like, how can we get fantasy baseball to have this kind of year-round attention that it used to? And podcasting, we're doing a lot of that, but as a whole, like in the industry, especially, well, you've been playing this for so many years, you've seen the ups and downs of fantasy baseball in particular. But how can we get things back to where people are talking about it year-round? As at a larger scale than what we're seeing now?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but I don't see it happening.
Okay.
I mean, I agree it sucks, but football is just so much bigger than baseball or hockey or basketball. It kind of shocks me too that they, like on Sirius XM, they just stopped talking about it in the middle of the baseball season. That's kind of shocking. But I just don't know an answer to your question. I mean, there's like the alternative places people can go, like your podcast and whatnot.
Should we be learning any lessons from fantasy football or DFS? Is there anything that we could glean from those? Like, why is fantasy football so much more popular? Is it because it's it used to be just once a week. Now, shit, we got games all the damn time. And so, like, how can we, is there anything that we could push over into baseball to, because often when I just having this conversation with a guy last night, he plays all these other fantasy sports. He plays college fantasy football, and he's got fantasy golf. He's got fantasy hockey. He's talking about trimming back leagues. And I said, yeah, I was in 11 baseball leagues last year. And he looked at me like I had like 3 eyes, like 11, like that's 11 more than I would play in, type of thing. And it's just like, to me, it's like, I only do the other fantasy sports to kill time so I have baseball. And like everybody else is like the reverse. It's like they may dabble in daily fantasy sports baseball or whatnot. But like, to me, it's like, again, is there anything that those other leagues or sports are doing that we should be doing in fantasy baseball?
I got an idea. Let's have a golden bat. I'll do it.
We should have like a golden bat, like a golden team, like every week. Like if we had a really terrible week, be like, nope, that one's gone. Throw that one out.
That stupid idea they're talking about for baseball was the golden bat or golden at bat.
Yeah, golden bat.
Have some. Yeah, no, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard. I mean, I would literally have to consider never watching baseball again if they did that. Like, I'm not even kidding. Anyway, I just don't have an answer. I just don't have an answer for you. What I do know is like daily fantasy sports became so popular because a lot of people want to play fantasy sports, but the commitment to year long, it's like football, baseball, basketball, 6 months or whatever. It's a long commitment. A lot of people, especially younger people, didn't want to make that commitment, so daily appeals to them. Yeah. And football is just more popular, and it's once a week. Although now, there are games on other nights, but at least the teams only play once a week instead of 6 games a week. The only good news, I don't have an answer to your question. The only good news, though, is that fantasy baseball is still here to stay. It's not as popular, but there's still lots of people that like fantasy baseball. They like season-long fantasy baseball. It's the second most popular after football, at least in the U.S. You've probably heard the statistic that in the United States, they estimate 50 million people play fantasy sports, and that's just age 18 and up. There's a lot of under 18 that play also. Right. But in India, so 50 million U.S. fantasy sports. In India, 200 million people play fantasy cricket.
Wow. Wow.
There's our market right there. We got to tap into the cricket market.
Wow.
The cricket company that has tried. The 200 million people that play cricket in this one, the company that has 200 million cricket players, I should say, they're worth $8 billion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Soccer's,
I know.
Soccer's really big in
Yeah.
soccer's really big in Europe and South America.
Yeah, I know. I think fantasy baseball has an uphill battle. I think it's a battle that can be won, and like Larry said, it's not going anywhere. Like there's always gonna be people who are interested and come to the game. I think the biggest issue for fantasy baseball, as opposed, and the reason why fantasy football and fantasy basketball, especially, have both become extremely popular, is those games are easier. I mean, let's be honest. Like they're easier games. They're your shorter seasons. And so that appeals to the masses. I think one of the things that the fantasy baseball industry as a whole, which we're a part of, has failed to do is kind of bridge the gap for the newer player in terms of making it more accessible. It's a much more difficult game to learn, especially the roto version, the rotisserie version of fantasy baseball, whereas fantasy football, it's very straightforward. You get a touchdown, you get 6 points. You go 10 yards, you get a point. It's a lot more difficult to kind of explain things, and I don't think, as a whole, podcasts and articles on fantasy baseball do a good enough job of explaining things to the new player. One of my favorite things I ever did in this industry was the short podcast series I did with my wife Danielle, in which I had people who were industry, people like Jason came on, and Paul came on, and Nick Pollock came on, and they explained the rules of fantasy baseball to her and the strategy of it, so that way she could learn to play. But I think it's an aspect of our industry that has fallen short, is kind of appealing it to the masses by making it easier to learn things.
Yeah, I had fun doing that. I remember that.
Yeah, it was a really good series. I wish we kept it up. All right, Larry, thank you so much for joining us. Definitely, everyone, go out right now, buy History of Fantasy Sports and the Stories of the People Who Made It Happen by Larry Schechter. Where can people go get this book? I know you can get it on Amazon, but can you get it anywhere else?
Yeah, it's most booksellers' websites, paperback and ebook. It's not in very many stores yet. There are a few. If you want to read more details about it, if you want to read a whole lot of reviews about it, Amazon has lots of details and lots of reviews.
Absolutely.
It's if either go buy it now or get it on your Christmas wish list. It's something, if you want to get a gift for people in your fantasy league or friends who play fantasy, it's a great gift. Because like the thing is, when you get a good like strategy book or website with lots of good strategy advice, you don't want to tell your league mates about it. You want to keep it to yourself. A book like this, you can share it with everybody.
Absolutely, everybody should be. You should be buying this book for everyone in all of your leagues. Jason, all 11 leagues of yours. Make sure
I'm down to 8. I've dropped 3
Oh.
this winter already. I am 8. I'm a hard cap.
Okay, so
I have a hard deck. I'm at 8, and I'm not going any higher.
All right. Well, that's
Justin,
96 people that you should be buying this book for.
Justin, you shouldn't bother buying yourself a book. What you should do is divorce Danielle and have a custody battle over that book in your divorce settlement.
You know what? I think she might win that battle.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
you get the kids. She gets the book. How about that?
I mean, the child support alone would make it worth it. I could then afford to go buy my own book. But I purchased a book as we were talking, so it will be here from Amazon on Wednesday, and then I will start digging into it and reading it during the kind of Christmas break time that I get off of my day job. Larry, thank you so much for joining us. Can you remind people where you can reach on social media?
Twitter, Larry Schechter, and Facebook, Larry Schechter. I think it's Larry Schechter 88 or something on Facebook.
There you go. And Jason, where can people reach you on social media? And then do you have anything going on?
Yeah, some fun stuff. So you can find me at Blue Sky at Jason Collette, their handle. A couple of things I've been playing around with lately that are a lot of fun. The daily walk-off game. I don't know if you guys have done dailywalkoff.com. You go to dailywalkoff.com and it gives you 4 columns, and it's 12 different player tiles, and you can pick your favorite baseball team. And it's just got random questions like, hey, in this column, it's the 3 guys that led the Rays in RBIs during the 2000s. And like you can move it around and you get different tries. So it's fun. It's free. There's a Discord group that you can learn from one. And that's been my favorite part of this right now is I see other people's grids and they can hide them so you don't get spoilers. And then at noon, they let them all go. And then you can learn like, oh, wow, I had no idea that guy qualified. That's for Immaculate Grid. I'm sorry. That's also Immaculate Grid. But the Discord for Immaculate Grid's called Ordinary. What I have here, Ordinary Effort is a Discord channel, and then they have everybody's grids. You can go learn from everybody else, and so I've kind of that's like been my morning ritual. I'll do daily walk off, I'll do Immaculate Grid, and then I'll come back end of the day and then look and see what other people put in their grids and comment and learn from that. So that's been a lot of fun and wrapped up a whole bunch of player outlooks at RotoWire. And now it's time for the Bold Prediction Series. So that first one will be hitting presses here in the next right around Christmas. And then that'll be my next 6 articles. So that's excited about this time of year. It really helps that we had a lot of transactions and a lot of roster things. It'd be nice if we had a few more to get in, but at least we got some more. Like we said earlier, the winter meetings were just great. And it's probably the best ones we've had in a while. Really jealous that Paul got to go and I didn't. But I think this was the first time he'd ever went because he sent me a text and asked me some questions and gave him some advice on some things. And I know we got to meet up with a longtime friend of ours, Byron, from back in the Roto Junkie days. And so that was cool. They got to get together and yeah, let's stay warm now.
You can reach me on social media. All my social media platforms are Justin Mason FWFB, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Blue Sky, Facebook, TikTok, all of those places. Currently, I'm working on projections, but I also will be starting my series on ADP risers and fallers coming up here in the next week or so, as well as we have all of our ranks already up on Fangraphs. Every position is being covered by a different person. And we're doing deep dives into the tiers and each player from every position. So I did catcher and shortstop. Paul did starting pitcher. You can catch all of those on fangraphs.com. And that will wrap us up for this episode. For Larry, Jason, myself, thank you for listening. Have a fantastic baseball offseason.